Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Is Mihika there? Mihika,
Yes,
joined
ma'am.
us. So I think we'll start if we are on time. I can see Siliguri here also. Warm welcome to Siliguri team. So happy that you're joining us. I think we'll start.
Good afternoon, Ma'am Shaha. Dear colleagues and my dear students. We welcome all of you to our second edition of Back to School series. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the teachers and students of Birla Divya Jyoti, Siliguri, who have joined us for today's session. Welcome, Ma'am Mitra.
Thank you so much.
Through observation and interaction with the environment, students get an opportunity to reflect and conceptualize independently, leading to holistic development. Job shadowing is a method of experiential learning we have been continuing at Mahadevi Birla World Academy for the past 4 years. This program is organized with an aim to provide students with a more acute awareness of career decision-making self-efficacy, knowledge of career entry requirements, and ideal job characteristics. Since last year, virtual sessions have been conducted with professionals and experts from different fields, and even with the alumni who shared their experiences, thus inspiring and guiding our students to pursue their dream career. Our guest today is someone who's fondly remembered for her calm and composed demeanor, both by teachers and students. Let's welcome Ms. Mihika Poddar, an articulate debater during her school days. And she has further nurtured her skills to become a successful lawyer. Let's get to know more.
I think Sangeeta ma'am has muted herself. We'll get to know more about her from our student, Pragya Basu.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good afternoon to everyone present here. I would like to thank Mrs. Mohta, our mentor and the chairperson of Sarla Birla Group of Schools, for giving us this opportunity. On behalf of the teachers and students present here today, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Ms. Mihika Poddar. Ms. Poddar is pursuing her PhD in law at University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. She's undertaking research on human rights and discrimination law, focusing on legal recognition of gender identity. Ms. Poddar obtained her MPhil in law and a Bachelor of Civil Law with distinction from Oxford University. She's also a qualified lawyer, a university medalist from the West Bengal National University of Juridical Sciences, India, where she completed her BA LLB in 2019. She has worked with several organizations dealing with legal policy in India and the United Kingdom. And today, as the alumna of our institution, she stands as a true inspiration for all the law aspirants sitting here today. We are all so delighted that you could spare some time for us from your busy schedule, Ms. Poddar. We are indeed very privileged to have you amongst us, and we look forward to a fruitful and enriching session.
Over to you, Mihika.
Thank you so much, Pragya and Ms. Ghosh. It's lovely to see you all, although virtually after so many years. And yeah, it's great to be back. And I mean, just since I was preparing for this, I've just been thinking and reflecting back on school. And sometimes it seems like it was so long ago, but at other times it seems like no time has passed at all. And I can still think about how, especially I think in +2, when you're thinking about what you want to do later, it can be such a stressful period with exams and with barely any time between applications and entrance exams and your board exams. So I completely empathize, and yeah, it's bringing back a lot of memories. As Pragya and ma'am both said, I'm here to speak today about my journey, which has mostly been in legal research, and that's what I'm still currently doing. So in all respects, I'm still a student. So happy to answer any questions about that aspect. If anyone has any question at any point, I'm happy for you to raise them even while I'm speaking. But if not, I will roughly give you a 15-minute overview of like what I have done and the process, and then we can open the floor up to discussion. Your questions don't have to be law specific or about specific entrance examinations or just about what I'm doing, because there are many ways to be a lawyer, and legal education leads you to many different pathways. I know I have lots of friends and colleagues that studied the law but are doing so many other different things, and I'm happy to speak about that as well. But yeah, as for my journey, it of course like began with the CLAT examination, which I've been told a lot of you are thinking of appearing for, and perhaps may already have started preparing for as well. And the CLAT is interesting because a lot of it is actually based on luck, which is something that you don't realize when you start preparing for it, because you do give 2 or 1 year at least to preparing. But ultimately, it's an MCQ exam, and more than your knowledge, it tests things like your dexterity, how quick you are, and whether you can think on your feet, and knowledge retention. And not all of them are skills that are necessary for you to ace your legal education or even become a lawyer. There is usually this common assumption that you need to either be great at debating or be very articulate or will have to stand in court and argue in black robes. But that's not the only way of being a lawyer. Something that we weren't really told. We didn't have sessions like this, and I didn't start preparing for CLAT till after my board exams. So this is something I did not know, and which is why I was also always a little apprehensive about law in school. And it's something that I only took up later on when I spoke to people doing it, and I realized that it entails much, much beyond that. On the CLAT specifically, it's been a while since I took it, and I think the format has changed since then. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but I'd say most of it was just about practicing exam questions under timed settings, because I think what I struggled with after CBSE was about appearing for just MCQ questions in such a long exam, because I was used to writing a lot of essay-based questions or doing specific kinds of math problems. So the CLAT was a very different thing to tackle. But yeah, so once you do clear the CLAT or any of the other entrance exams for law schools, you realize that law school isn't really anything to do with what you prepared for CLAT, which can be a very disorienting experience, because a lot of it is not about actually memorizing statutes and case law, but it's about understanding them and applying them and sort of learning to think like a lawyer. So how do you use legal language and existing laws to further your case, be that in private corporate practice, be that in constitutional or human rights cases, or even things like regulatory laws such as environmental protection or consumer protection, which I'm guessing some of you might have studied as a part of your business studies curriculum. Yeah, and I know some of you are also, ma'am was saying, considering going outside India for your undergrad studies. Then of course, law looks very different, because if you're considering the US, as some of my friends did, you do have to do a general undergrad and then you have to do law school, which takes slightly longer. So I did it in India at NUJS, which was a 5-year program. So that's the BA and LLB, which you get through the CLAT route. So it's essentially a combined BA with the specialized degree in law. Essentially ends up saving you 1 year. But a lot of other people also end up doing a BA, which takes 3 years, and then applying for a 3-year law degree. And a lot of institutions actually offer that. I know Campus Law Center in Delhi is a really good place, and Jindal does it. Even ILS Pune does it. So there are also a lot of 3-year law programs that people end up taking after studying political science or sociology and several other fields. And I think that also gives people a really interesting segue into law, where you start by looking at how society functions or how politics functions, and then go into what is the role of law within society or within politics. And that gives you an interesting outlook. And that's something, I mean, looking back, if I hadn't started law right after class 12, is a route that I would have taken. And I think is something that people don't really speak about that much, especially since CLAT, but it's a very common route and something that gives you many different perspectives into law. So once I started law school, and when you'll be in law school, there are a lot of different things that you can do. And I started this talk by saying that there is no one way to be a lawyer, or a lawyer doesn't look like a stereotype person who argues in court or wears black robes, although that's a really interesting experience. And it can be a really interesting career choice as well. I decided early on that I did not want to do litigation full time because I was more attracted to policy research and looking at politics from the perspective of a lawyer. So looking at how do you design and shape laws rather than looking at implementation through litigation. And that sort of shaped the choices that I ended up making during law school, and the kinds of activities that I picked and chose to do and not do. This, of course, involved many internships, where I did start by doing some litigation internships and also did some at corporate firms to make my final call that policy research is my calling, and that's what I want to pursue. And I can just start by telling you a little about what legal policy research entails, and then take you through some of the other options if you don't choose to do this. What are the other options that are available beyond litigation? So policy research is done in many different spheres, although the avenue in India is a little bit limited at the moment because there are very few organizations that do it outside of the government. So if you're part of the government, either as directly in politics, or if you are a part of the administrative services, you will be involved in lawmaking. And by lawmaking, I mean drafting of the laws that are tabled before the parliament and then are passed or not passed. And second are more administrative legal systems, which is your day-to-day rules based on which the government itself functions and different government departments function. So those are the broadly two kinds of laws that the policy space looks at. For this, you usually require, although it's not necessary, a lot of people do end up going into higher education, which is after law school, getting a master's and then going back, because a lot of law school is to do with more practical legal application or specific laws that exist, and not a lot of it covers theory or the reasons behind lawmaking. And that is something that I ended up exploring when I did my master's in 2019 and 2020. And that can also be a really interesting experience, but it's not necessary to go into policy. And a lot of people who end up joining think tanks straight after law school. And and for most other things or most other options as well, higher education after law school is not really necessary and something that people end up doing after a few years of experience with work. And one of the most other common aspects is going into corporate law, which I'm sure a lot of you must have heard of. The hours can be grueling, as my friends tell me, because you have long work days, but it also gives you a lot of job security. And the recruitment cycle usually starts midway through law school. So even before you've graduated, so around your third or fourth year, you start appearing for interviews and sitting for jobs. And a lot of people end up securing them at that stage as well. As to the kind of work that you end up doing as a corporate lawyer, well, I didn't end up doing that, but what I know from my internships or like people who, my batchmates who did it, is it involves a lot of transactional work. So you work with clients or corporations to look at the legal compliances that they need to do. So for instance, if there is a company and it requires, it wants to merge with another company. So what are the different almost like a checklist that law has that you need to comply with? So it involves a lot of paperwork, but also a lot of negotiation with the parties and to decide on the particular terms of like how much will you pay for the other company's assets, or what will you do with your existing assets and things like that. So it's not all paperwork, but it's also not direct litigation like a litigating lawyer would do. Another very common thing that, and I considered that for a long time, was entering the IAS or the administrative services, which is something that a legal education really prepares you for and is one of the specialist papers that you end up giving under the exam structure. To do that, people usually end up taking a year or a 2-year break after their primary education, after their secondary education, which is after law school, and preparing for that exam, because it can be a little taxing and grueling. I did consider it for a long time, and I may still do it at a future point in time, but I didn't end up doing it right after law school. But it's something that a lot of people consider and can be an interesting option to explore. So this briefly is some of the options that you could end up choosing after a legal education, and I'm happy to speak a little more about any of these things. But in terms of just general practical next steps, I know a lot of people end up taking a year off after class 12 to prepare for CLAT, and it's something that a lot of my friends did as well. I don't think it's necessary for you to take it. You should definitely appear for it right after college, right after school. And you can always, it can be a practice exam, even if not the final one, and you do end up taking a year off for doing something in your gap year. So not only some of you were considering doing that. I know it can be really stressful right after your board exams to be preparing for CLAT, because there isn't a lot of time between those two things. I know some people end up taking coaching from 11th or from 12th, and that's helpful, but it becomes difficult to balance that alongside your exam preparations. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. I personally started preparing for it around midway through class 12. So it was a little challenging because I didn't know till then that I was considering law at all. And that was a stressful decision to be doing it alongside exams, but I think a little bit of time management and knowing that you do still have some time. I had about a month between my boards and the CLAT exam, which can be a good time to sort of wrap your head around what the exam entails and to do a lot of practice. But that said, it's completely okay to take a year off if the first try doesn't work out. It's so much more common than you'd imagine to do that and then appear for it a second time. And even beyond CLAT, now there are many more examinations, like there's the LSAT, which exists for other colleges. Then I know places like ILS Pune and GLC have their own examination system. So there are many options beyond just the CLAT as well. And it's helpful to explore those as well. So those are briefly my talking points. And if anyone has any questions or wants me to talk about specific things, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I can expand on what the work I'm doing right now and the other things I've done since last.
Thank you, Mihika. It indeed very enriching to know about your experiences and how you went through it. There are many questions that our students have. So we can ask them some questions.
So Fatima ma'am, before the students come on and ask their questions, I just wanted to say hi to Mihika. I remember her extremely fondly in my school years at Mahadevi Birla World Academy with her as a young student. Always remember her as being very serious, very driven, very focused. But what distinguished her from many others is her empathy. I think she always stopped to find time to think about those who were not as privileged as she and many others. And I think that is what made her stand tall amongst our students. And I love the fact that, Mihika, you brought today to the table that being a lawyer is not about being seen in black robes and arguing fluently, coherently in court, because that's what Suits tells them. And that's what all the soap operas and all the films that they watch tell them, a very glamorous version of the lawyer. But there is so much more to law. It's all about holding society together and about giving a coherent cementing to all the values that we hold dear, whether it's policy, whether it's formulation of laws, acts, bills. It's all about a mind that thinks ahead. So thank you so much, Mihika. I remember the time when you interned in Sir's chamber, and all the learnings, all the journey. The journey has been fantastic, and I'm so glad that you took some time off from your busy schedule to share your journey with young ones, because when young ones connect with others, I think it has a huge impact. So I'm going to say thank you on behalf of the family, and now over to our students for their questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that.
Students can raise their hand. Students who are having questions can raise their hand. They can also write the questions in the chat box. In the meantime, while the students take some time for the questions, Mihika ma'am, what I was asking, could you please tell the students as to how to balancing their CLAT exams and their board exams? Many times they find it extremely difficult. So if you could throw some light on that.
Definitely. And as I said, I only started preparing in class during class 12. So it was all the more stressful because I hadn't started earlier in class 11. And board exams were on my head, and that was always considered to be a make or break thing for future studies and your profession at large. So it was very difficult to balance it, but I'm glad that I think most people here are from class 11, as you said. So it's a great time to start and try to achieve that balance. What I ended up doing was I used to keep at least a day in the week to dedicate to my CLAT prep, and the rest of the time was for my exams. So I think CLAT, at least when I gave it, had 5 different subjects. I think they ended up doing away with one. So I think legal reasoning isn't there anymore. So I used to divide my day and do at least 2 subjects a day. So for instance, if I pick Saturday as my CLAT prep day, then I would have first half that I would do general reading and some practice questions. And then in the second half, I'd do some mocks, of course, after a few weeks of making myself familiarizing myself with the material. And that was really helpful. And as I said, ultimately, it's an MCQ exam. You don't need to remember or learn a lot. Most of it is about familiarizing yourself with the pattern of the exam, and then about practicing to make sure you can achieve your target number of questions, or as many as you can in the given time frame. So that was really helpful. And I didn't require, even after I started in class 12, more than once a week till my exams got over. And you do have at least a fortnight or a month between your boards ending and the CLAT, although I think they keep changing their date every year depending on the NLU that's conducting it. And that's a very helpful time to just cement your knowledge, go through everything that you've done. For you, it will be 1.5 or 2 years. For me, it was 6 months or so. And yeah, it ended up working out. And I don't think it's very difficult to manage it with boards, even though it's challenging. Especially with, I think your board exams would have done the same thing so many times till your prelims and till your mid-class 12th, that you would be looking for new information and ways to challenge yourself to just get away with the boredom of reading the same textbook for the 6th or 7th time. So it was also like helpful for my board prep that one day gave me a freshness or a change of perspective from what I was doing for the rest of the week.
Okay. So I can see Ashia, you've raised your hand, Ashia.
Ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, my question for you is, what do you feel is the basic difference between the Indian legal education and the foreign legal education?
That's a really interesting question. And I, of course, did my undergraduate in India. And I'm doing my master's here in the UK. So there are two different levels at which to compare the systems. But I can tell you from like what I understand of the undergrad system here. Again, there is a difference between the US and Canada, and then Australia and England and Singapore. Because in the US and Canada and some other countries, you can't get a legal education right out of school. You first need a general undergraduate degree, which will be around 4 years, and then you go for law school, which is around 3 or 4 years, depending on the country or the school you go to. So it ends up taking more amount of time. That said, I think with the national law schools and generally the 5-year program, a lot of the differences are starting to be bridged. Of course, there is a difference between the quality of education that you have here and outside, because a lot of people who end up going down the academic route when they take up law end up getting recruited outside of India. So there is a huge drain, as they call it, in the legal sector as well as there is in the sciences. The fact is that, yeah, it's just more attractive if you want to teach to go outside. But the people, I mean, from my experience, the people who do end up staying back, I had some great professors. So I don't feel like I missed out on much by choosing to do my legal education here. I ended up saving a few years rather. And I mean, the education curriculum differs depending on any school that you pick and end up comparing. So if you are specifically considering a country or a particular university, I think it's helpful to look at the curriculum, the number of years that you will be studying it for, and also generally whether the degree is recognized in India or not. Because I know like a lot of, since law is something so specific to your jurisdiction or country that it differs based on any system that you're in, a lot of times if you study here, you might not directly be able to practice or be a qualified lawyer elsewhere, and vice versa. So I think if you do want to come back home in India and teach, or if you want to work, say, in a particular country, it's helpful to look at what are their requirements and whether they will recognize your legal education in a different country or not.
Okay. Thank you, Mihika. I can see some more hands raised. Karen?
There's Karen, Disha, and Pragya, all waiting to ask questions. Karen first then.
Ma'am, my question would be, if you saw yourself here 10 years back, like doing what you are doing, if not, how would you say that law school changed your perspective and thinking process?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think 10 years ago when I was in class, I think 10 then, I wasn't really considering legal education. I was still very confused as to what I wanted to do. And that's completely okay because you genuinely have so much time, even if you think that you don't. And I was considering taking science or doing journalism, but law as a career wasn't as accessible because it wasn't something that was considered off the bat because we don't really study it in 11th and 12th. It seems like a completely different and new thing. So I knew that I wanted to do something that was public facing or something to do with society generally, where be it through journalism or be it through any other way. I think what law school ended up doing was really give me the tools to do something like that, to look at how I, with my legal expertise, can play a role in changing society or almost working towards making some things function better. what I didn't realize maybe 10 years down the line, 10 years back, was how difficult that can be. Or, I mean, back then, when you know if you want to be a journalist or want to be a lawyer, it just, you know, like there is a caricature of what you will be doing. But I think the day-to-day experience of doing that is very different. And in some ways, it's more exciting because what you end up doing changes day to day, or you become very attached to certain projects that you end up doing and causes that you end up identifying with, which are things that I wasn't really thinking about 10 years back. It was more of, I would like to be a journalist or I would like to be a scientist, and not really looking at what exactly the role of that professional would be on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if that exactly answers the question, though. So if you have a follow-up question, I'm happy to answer that.
Karen, do you have a follow-up question?
That answered my question. Thank you so much.
Okay, Disha, you can go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. So, ma'am, as you are a Rhodes Scholar, so I wanted to ask you, how did you prepare for your scholarship examinations, and if you have some tips on how to ace it?
So I deliberately chose not to talk a lot about that during my presentation, because I think that's a really far way from where you are now. So that's our school, which is your postgrad degree. And that is a call even I ended up taking towards the end of my law school, that I want to pursue that. And there are very limited fields in which you actually would require to do that. So if you're doing litigation, for instance, or if you're doing corporate law, I think it's preferable, or at least like people in the profession prefer, that you spend 1 or 2 years getting the experience and then going outside. Since I had made up my mind, I wanted to do policy, maybe around third year of law school, second or third year of law school, I knew that I had to study further to be able to achieve that. Of course, to study further, I, at least like abroad, I needed a scholarship, and this was one of the few that do exist. Now, generally, how most scholarships work is, if you're applying for your undergraduate to the US, they follow this mixed system of, they look at academics, but they look at many more things beyond that. And I think this is one of the scholarships that do that. So even though, and that's true for most admission to most universities after law school as well. So for CLAT, it's an examination. So they don't really look at anything else. So you are inclined to say that, okay, I can compromise on my board exams, on my extracurriculars, and that will be okay. But if you are even remotely considering that you might want to study further, I'd say that these things are very important. So in terms of course, like when I was in 11th and 12th, I didn't know that I'll one day be applying for the scholarship and doing this. But generally focusing on extracurriculars along with academics is really helpful. And that's something I ended up doing through law school as well. So always looking for opportunities beyond the compulsory courses, if that makes sense. So be it through competitions or through work experience like internships, and also publications. So you end up reading and writing a lot of essays and a lot of projects. A little different from like the projects we end up doing in school, but more like say things like creative writing essays and things that you write, but more geared towards a specific legal questions, for instance. And a lot of journals end up accepting those for publications, and those are things that become really important. Of course, like these, I think, is this is really early for you to be considering any of these things, but that's the very brief overview. And there's no exam for most of these, so it works on an application format. So you send something like a statement of purpose, telling them why you want to study, what you want to study, and why you're the best candidate to do that. And that is done through all the experiences that you've gathered through like competitions, internships, and your academics, and then say that. And then there's usually an interview. Some scholarships have that, some don't. But the interview is again mostly about your work, and it's like a job interview, but for studying. And these things, yes, will come much later on, but at this stage, I'd say we should just not compromise on either extracurriculars or academics just because you are preparing for CLAT.
Thank you so much.
Pragya?
I wanted to ask, like, how were you absolutely sure that law was something you wanted to do? Was there any factors or anything else that made you decide that, yes, law is for me or something?
Not really, because as I said earlier, I didn't decide till much later on. It was like midway through class 12th, and even then I started preparing for the CLAT. I wasn't very convinced. I was sure that I wanted to do it only once I was in law school, when I realized what it entails. And I think that's why sessions like these are so important, or like when you start considering these questions in class 11 or earlier, so you know what the profession looks like, so you can make a much more informed decision than I did. But I can tell you why I ended up sticking with it, or why I didn't doubt my decision to do the law. Just in terms of the way the education system is structured, it was one of the ways for me to get a very specialized kind of educational training, but at the same time, it was general enough for me to not become a specific kind of professional. So the legal education curriculum is, I think, one of the closest to a liberal arts degree that they have in the States and elsewhere, where you have some compulsory subjects, and then you have the freedom to choose many optional subjects, and a lot of them can then cater to your specific interests. So I ended up taking a lot of courses focusing on sociology, on political science, and all of them talk about not just the law, but what the law looks like in the broader context. So what really attracted me was using the law as a tool to sort of transform social phenomenon, or so bring about social change in many ways, which is why I ended up picking lawmaking and not the practice of law. And I think it is one of the easier ways in which you can interact with the political process without actually being in politics. So I don't have to contest the elections or be a politician to be able to have some sort of say or change in the lawmaking process.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mihika, can you throw some light on the internships? How important are internships as part of the legal course, BLLB courses?
I think internships become quite important because the course is a really long one. So unlike your normal BA courses or the BBA or BCom, it is 5 years. And so it keeps you out of the so-called job market, or from getting any sort of practical full-time experience for 5 full years. And internships become the way in which you dabble with almost real life experience. So you sort of apply all your academic knowledge to practical situations. And for me, it was really helpful because it ended up helping me decide what I don't want to do rather than what I want to do for a long time. So how it's usually structured is you have semesters in the same way that you have in school, but the breaks are much longer. So you have a long summer break. And then since my law school was in Calcutta, of course, we had a long Durga Puja break, but that's not there elsewhere, where they have a longer winter break instead. And those are the times that even the institution expects you to go and intern. What this usually entails is some form of job shadowing, or sometimes people delegate smaller day-to-day paperwork and tasks to interns. And this really helps you first see what it is, like what, say, litigation is about or what corporate law is about, and see whether you would want to be in that space or not. And that was really helpful. And besides this functional aspect, later when you're applying for jobs or when you're applying to study further, these become a part of your CV. and thus become more important. So if you've interned in some interesting places, or if you've interned or worked with people who work in the broader areas that you're interested in which, say, you'll be applying for a job or specific subjects that you want to study further, that becomes important because you're demonstrating that you were interested in this for a long time. So your decision is thought out, and you also have some practical experience working in that particular field. So yes, it can be a little stressful because you don't end up technically having a break because you are interning through your vacations, but it can be a really enjoyable experience and a good break from just studying for 5 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. Would you like to share some best experiences of your internships? What has been your best experience? Because as a student, even I have done it, and I know like some of the internships, like you absolutely love to talk about.
Yeah, so I think it was actually one of my first internships that I still remember very fondly. It was with this lawyer at the Supreme Court. His name is Salman Khurshid. So he was the ex-law minister, and he still had a lot of political cases that he was handling. And so the kinds of cases that I ended up working in were really interesting. So I remember there was this one case on, I think it was about reservations in jobs and higher education, and they were challenging it for a specific institution, saying that it is unconstitutional, the degree of reservations. And I had not studied constitutional law at that point because this was at the end of my first year. So I knew very little, but I almost learned how constitutional law works and how fundamental rights and the reservation process works through working on that case and through helping out. And I think I fell in love with the subject before I even studied it through my internship. And that almost sort of like funneled my interests and what I became interested in studying later on. And even the internship generally, I had a great time because the people were really good. They actually believed in mentorship, so they gave interns a lot of time. So they took out their time to explain smaller things, understanding that we wouldn't really be familiar with that. And the office culture was great, which is something I did not experience in some of my other internships. So the work hours were good. And yeah, I think that made all the difference to convince me that this is kind of the broader area that I wanted to go into. Although, yeah, I didn't end up choosing litigation. I know people who interned with me there, some of them are actually litigating. So yeah, for me, it was more of the subject matter that convinced me, but for others, it was also the mode of engaging with that was more convincing.
Okay. One more question. Traditional colleges or national law universities? Because what we are seeing in CLAT, there's a lot of competition. So many students have this question as in, can we opt for traditional colleges and would the exposure be same? So what would you say on that?
Of course, my opinion on this would be from a position where I have only looked at one system because I ended up joining an NLU. But from what I know of how the system or the curriculum functions in other universities, there isn't a huge difference in terms of the curriculum itself, because the Bar Council has a limited number of compulsory subjects, which the subjects are the same essentially. The difference would be, of course, if you're doing a 3-year degree, your options in terms of additional subjects would be more limited. But this would mean that you've already studied something else for the first 3 years, which would generally be your BA degree. So you'd have that scope to explore those additional things before. I think what the NLU system does a little differently is just the amount of exposure it has, because it is like specialized law school. And just because of that institutional reputation, there are some people who have more experience in the fields that they're teaching, like some experts that come in. And later on, when you are looking for jobs, then you know how the system works, that if you're from the same institution, you'd prefer someone from the same institution. it's not ideal, and that's not what should be happening. But in practice, that does happen. Although I think increasingly that's changing with private universities, or with a lot of people from the so-called traditional universities coming up with many different kinds of experiences, especially after things have become online and everyone has access to the same kinds of resources with online lectures and things like that. It is changing. So I wouldn't say that not going down the NLU route puts you at a significant disadvantage. You might have to work a little bit harder, but I don't think you should dismiss it completely. And some of them, especially like ILS, Delhi University, then the General 3-year law program, they are really good. And I think some of their courses are better than some of the NLU courses from what I have seen. So it should definitely not, that there shouldn't be a bias against it from the get-go.
Okay. Any more questions from the students? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mihika. We are immensely thankful to you for your enriching session and for helping our students. And now I would like to call upon Disha Chatterjee to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Mihika ma'am, for the very insightful and exciting session. I think everyone will agree that you have answered all our questions very well and cleared the innumerable doubts we had. You made a lot of things less confusing and easier for us to understand. We hope that you enjoyed the session as much as we did. We sincerely wish you best of luck for the road ahead. Thank you, Principal Ma'am, for giving us the opportunity to organize this wonderful session. It was indeed a pleasure. Thank you, Aisen Ma'am and Evjabin Ma'am, for your constant support and guidance. This would not have been possible without you. And lastly, thank you to all the students for joining and attending this session. We hope that all your queries were answered and you had a great time as well. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great day ahead.
Thank you.